At 17, a routine pizza delivery turned into a nightmare when two flirtatious women lured me into their home. Let's just make this easy. Left me fleeing for my life. Discover how I narrowly escaped this terrifying trap. At 17, I worked as a pizza delivery boy for a local pizza place. By this point, I had done countless deliveries. My first car was an old, cheap Toyota, perfect for bopping around town. It was a Friday or Saturday night, and I was working the closing shift, which ended at midnight. The shop stayed open later on weekends. Toward the end of the night, probably past 11, my boss, whom I'll call Mario, gave me the details for my last delivery. 1 pie to a woman named Karen. It was an unusually long drive, about 15 minutes, compared to the usual 5-minute trips. I hoped for a better tip due to the distance. I brought the pizza to my car and set off, listening to my usual playlist. I pulled up to the address and parked in front of a small house in a lower-income area. The lights were on in one of the rooms on the first floor. As I approached the door, a woman called out from a window of the house next door saying, "Excuse me, that pizza is for us. We gave the wrong address." I walked next door and saw that the doorbell was broken. I opened the storm door and knocked loudly on the main door. There was no answer for about 30 seconds, so I knocked again. I heard a woman's voice on the other side yell, "1 second," but it still took forever for them to open the door. After another minute, the door finally opened. A woman, probably in her mid-40s, answered with a flirtatious smile and gave me a head-to-toe stare. She called out loudly, "Charles, come look how handsome the delivery boy is." Another woman about the same age came over and did the same. I felt my cheeks getting red as I was a bit shy around older women. The first woman, presumably Karen, asked what time I got off work. I started getting nervous because I wasn't good at flirting. I said, "This is probably my last delivery." One of the women asked if I wanted to come in and have some wine with them. Knowing my friends would never let me live it down if I blew this opportunity, I said, "Yeah, sure." They asked how old I was, and I lied, saying 21. They laughed and said they didn't care if I was under 21. They told me to sit on the couch, and they both sat on either side of me. The whole encounter felt too good to be true. I could tell they were already very drunk. The women were very flirty, commenting on my dimples and how cute my shyness was. I pretended to enjoy the wine even though it tasted disgusting to me. Then Chelsea said they wanted to show me something in the basement. I laughed and asked what it was. They both laughed and said it was a secret, but I'd like it. They wanted me to go down first. Honestly, I had my own fantasy about what was going to happen in the basement, but it was nowhere near that. I walked over to the basement doorway and looked down into the darkness. I looked back at them and noticed they weren't laughing anymore. They had blank faces until they saw me looking, then started laughing and smiling again. I asked firmly, "What's down there?" They almost said in unison, "It's a surprise." I started to walk slowly down into the basement, asking where the light switch was. One of them said, "Leave the lights off." As I looked down into the basement, I thought I saw something move. Maybe a person's arm or hand. I turned around and saw the two women creeping towards the door. I stepped out of the basement and shut the door, saying I needed the money for the pizza. Nervously, I walked around them closer to the front door. That's when I saw a towering man standing in the doorway of an adjacent room, probably the kitchen. His 5 words have stayed with me all these years. "Let's just make this easy." I turned for the door and said, "The pizza's free." I ran to open the door and slammed it behind me, only to hear it open seconds later. I got in my car, locking the door first thing, and the man was already outside my passenger side window, looking in. He tried opening the door and then knocked on the glass. I put it in drive and got out of there without looking back. I got back to work and told my boss what happened and why I came back empty-handed. He and the rest were in shock. I called the non-emergency number to report what happened, just in case anything else should be reported at that address. Whatever trap I was about to walk into, thank God I didn't find out what it was. When I was 19, I worked at a nearby pizza place to help pay for food and gas. The job was easy. Take the order, box up the food, put it in a bag, and drive it to the given address. I had done it a million times before, and nothing weird ever happened. It was very repetitive. Tips usually ranged from $3 to $5 depending on the distance. Sometimes more generous people would give 10 or more. I remember this order was just a chicken parm hero and a regular slice. Smaller orders like this usually yielded lesser tips, but I didn't have a choice in which deliveries I did. I was on my way to the address, and of course, the house was on a dead-end block. This block had a more rural feel than the rest of the neighborhood. One house had an RV sitting on the grass with a small patch of woods next to it. The other houses looked like little farmhouses, with a lot more space on this particular street. When I pulled up to the address, it was a small, weird-looking house with a huge property. It sat next to what appeared to be an abandoned house with overgrown grass and shrubs. It was around 6 p.m. and it was getting pretty dark. It was the time people would start turning on their lights, but all the lights in this house were off. I noticed the front door seemed cracked open. As I walked over to the door, I heard a piano being played. It sounded muffled, as if it were a couple of rooms away, behind walls or a door. I knocked and rang the bell, but the doorbell didn't work. The piano was still playing. Feeling weird about just walking in, I walked around the property towards the back. The backyard was a mess, with things scattered all over the grass. I even saw a broken, rusty chain-link fence lying in the middle of the yard. I knocked loudly on the back door and looked through the glass, seeing only a messy storm room. Clearly, these people were not neat freaks. When nobody answered the back door either, I went back around front and called one of the guys at the pizzeria to confirm the address. He took a second to check and confirm that I was at the correct address. So I went back to the front door, pushed it open, and heard the creepy piano music still playing. I yelled, "Pizza's here!" The piano stopped and someone yelled, "Over here!" Then the piano resumed, playing a simple yet creepy, repetitive song on a loop. There were no lights on in the house, so it was hard to see. I walked closer to the music. The smell inside was musty and off-putting. I got halfway into what you call the foyer and felt very uncomfortable. I wasn't going any further. I yelled from the front door, "Sir?" The music stopped for good, and now there was just silence. I backed towards the door to be closer to the outside. Expecting to hear footsteps, I was met with dead silence. I called again. "Sir?" A voice from another room replied, "Yes, sorry, I have trouble walking. Could you just bring it in here, please?" I asked, "What room are you in, sir?" He took a moment to answer, "If you just walk through the living room, I'm in the dining room." There were no instructions to do any of this on the phone, so it was very strange. I thought for a second about my next move. I felt bad leaving if this was an old, feeble man living in a messy house. I started walking through the living room. There was an opening that led to what I presumed was the dining room. My overly cautious and paranoid self was still suspicious. Instead of walking straight into the dining room, I peeked around the wall just enough for one eye to see into the room. I saw the piano, but no one was sitting at it. I didn't see anyone in the entire room. Quietly, but quickly, I walked back to the front door, shut it behind me, and drove back to the pizzeria. I explained that I got a sketchy vibe inside the house. My boss was completely understanding, especially since the alleged customer didn't call back asking why I left. That said everything. I didn't understand the logic in trying to commit a robbery in your own house, and neither did my boss or coworkers. Later that night after work, I looked up the address. The house had been foreclosed on months ago and was vacant. When I told everyone, they had the same mouth-dropping reaction I did. I was mere steps away from probably getting robbed. Either that, or someone was playing a horrible prank on an unsuspecting pizza delivery guy. It was my last week working at an Italian restaurant, a half pizzeria, half Italian eatery. My duties switched from shift to shift. Sometimes I worked the front register, sometimes I was a busboy, and sometimes I did deliveries. I enjoyed the deliveries the most because of the tip money. Ironically, I left this job with a horrible, scarring experience during one of those deliveries. It was a late-night delivery. Of course, that's when shady things happen. We got an order for 3 specialty pizzas. A big order worth about $70. The delivery was to the bad side of town, a minor red flag. Good thing I drove a crappy old Civic that wouldn't draw any negative attention. Or so I thought. The drive took at least 15 minutes. When I got to the house, I went up to ring the bell. The door opened within seconds, revealing a Latino man who opened the door halfway. Seeing the pizzas, he opened it fully, exposing a pistol in his hand. I'm not a gun person, but if I had to guess, it was a Colt .45. My heart dropped at the sight of it, realizing the situation. 2 more Latino men appeared at the door, grabbing me while the first one kept the gun pointed at me. They were yelling in Spanish at each other. The guy with the gun then said in broken English, "Give me all of your stuff." I could barely breathe or speak due to my panic. I handed over my wallet, which was all I could offer. He then yelled, "Phone!" I gave him my Motorola Razr, the iPhone of the 2000s. One of them forcibly grabbed my wrist and yanked off my watch, thankfully not an expensive one. After this, one of them took my ID from my wallet and read out my address. They threatened me, saying if I told anyone they'd come to my house and kill my whole family. I said, "Okay, I understand," wanting to cry for help but couldn't. They pushed me out of the house, causing me to land on my hands and knees, bleeding. They slammed the door shut, leaving me with only my keys. I didn't return to the pizzeria. I was too shaken and disturbed. I went home, noticeably quiet and shaky. My parents noticed my scuffed shorts and bloody knees. They knew something was wrong and pried the truth out of me. I told them I was robbed at gunpoint during a delivery, and the robbers had our address and threatened to kill us. My dad, who had connections with the police department, called one of his close friends immediately. They did a background check on the person living at that address. His name was Rodrigo, and he had 4 prior felony convictions. Ignoring the threat, my dad, with his police connections, had a squad of police cars surround the house and enter with guns drawn. I wasn't there, but we heard a description of the scene through my dad's connections. 2 of the 3 men were still in the house and were arrested and charged. The man with 4 convictions got a life sentence. One of his accomplices had a prior conviction and was sentenced to 5 years. The 3rd guy wasn't in the house and was never found. To this day, he's still out there, for all I know. Since then, I've woken up to sounds from outside, like footsteps on the side walkway or the gate swinging open and closed. It could be my imagination or paranoia, but I still worry for my family's well-being. Enough time has passed that I think the man fled the country, or at least knows better than to show his face in this town again. But it's something that always hangs in the back of my mind.